It's Jenny Geist. She's now reviewing stuff, cause just doing essays is super tough.
Help.
So join us now, let's play some games for the 3DS system. It's Jenny Geist time.
Licensed tie-in games are a dime a dozen these days. We have all been gifted one by an unknowing family member at some point, so we all know of the genre's mixed reputation. They are the cheaply produced marketing tools that only exist to make a quick buck by using a popular character's face. Nothing more, nothing less. Thus, in recent years, the genre has basically died out entirely. Most companies have instead migrated to the mobile market, and the console games that do come out are either big-budget AAA efforts or unique titles from smaller indie studios that don't necessarily need to have a massive audience. Gone are the days of Ratatouille for the Wii and iCarly for the DS. Now we're in the era of Spider-Man Miles Morales and TMNT Shredder's Revenge. The shift did not happen overnight, however. The early 2010s were an interesting time for the genre, as the PS2, DS, and Wii had reached the end of their lives, but smartphones hadn't really hit their stride yet either. Likewise, the consoles that were out at the time were aimed at hardcore gamers, enthusiasts, or whoever the target audience of the Wii U was. White families with coffee tables. So, if you were a publisher wanting to make a licensed game in, say, 2013, your only option was the 3DS, a console that was successful but wasn't quite as successful as any of its predecessors, which put the medium at a bit of a crossroads. Some publishers put more effort in to make up for the smaller install base, and some still developed the same types of cash-ins as before and expected their crap to still sell. It's fascinating to examine in retrospect, because this kind of feels like the era where the archetypical licensed tie-in game died. Looking past then, there are barely any of these on Switch, Series X, or PS5, and the ones that do release stand out as vestiges of a bygone era. Like, why is there a Hotel Transylvania game on the Switch? Who is this for? I'm genuinely fascinated by these types of games, and I'm not even sure why. Like, yeah, most of them are pretty bad. I'm not even doing much of an autopsy for the genre because the reasons it died are fairly well documented. Here's the documents. But even the worst games on the planet are still made by actual people who tried their darndest. No developer wants to make a bad experience, but they're not always given the time or budget or resources that they need to make something memorable. While they still deserve to be criticized when due, I also think they still deserve to be analyzed and evaluated like anything else. And what better samples are there to analyze and evaluate than some of the final ones to ever come out? The 3DS actually has, like every type of licensed game, the actual attempts at good experiences, the unambitious platformers that are just kinda there, the generally unappealing minigame collections. They are all here, each distinct variations that could use one last snapshot in history. So without further ado, I'm going to play 5 games on a console that I love based off of properties that I love in a genre that only a mother could love. This will partially be an examination of the different facets of a lost species, and partially be an excuse to play some dumb, silly 3DS games. So let's begin.
Adventure time, come on, grab your friends, we'll go to very distant lands with Jake the dog and Finn the human, the fun will never end, it's adventure time.
First things first, there's the extravagantly titled Adventure Time, Hey Ice King, Why'd You Steal Our Garbage?, which came out in the fall of 2012 for the DS and 3DS. This adaptation of Cartoon Network's beloved series was developed by WayForward, the team behind the acclaimed Mighty Switch Force and Shantae franchises, as well as a bunch of other weird and forgotten licensed titles of varying quality. And when I say a bunch, I mean a bunch. It's most of their pre-2010s output, like holy crap. Out of that selection, however, this is definitely one of their better ones, so much so that it's probably one of the most well-known and well-liked games on this list. Not only did it release right as the 3DS was gaining some much-needed traction, but it also came out at the peak of the show's early popularity, so HIKWYSOG actually has a bit of a cult fanbase. And after playing it, I can totally understand why. The game is basically a simplified version of Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, combining 2D platforming sections with a large explorable overworld to create a simplistic action RPG, which is an absolutely inspired gameplay choice for the series. The world of Ooh already felt straight out of an 80s video game, so taking direct inspiration from that era is a very clever move that brings in a wonderful retro aesthetic. The sprite work is sharp, and Jake Kaufman's soundtrack, like all of his work, is positively wonderful. The only part of the presentation that I don't really care for is the backgrounds and character portraits, which both use pixelated stills from the series, but otherwise I would say it looks pretty nice by 3DS standards. Meanwhile, the plot is exactly what it says on the tin. The Ice King stole from Finn and Jake's garbage bin, so they must go after him to save their trash. That's literally it. Since this was made when the series was still new, most of the content is based off of the earlier seasons. But considering I find those seasons to be super underrated these days, I am 100% okay with that. Not every joke is top of the line material, but one of the bosses is literally a bear with a chainsaw taped on, so who cares? Funnily enough, one of the other bosses is an army of Gunther clones, and considering some of the series' later lore, that is actually kind of terrifying. Maybe they'll do a special about this, who knows. When it comes to the quality of the game design proper, HIKWYSOG admittedly does have a few faults. I'll be blunt, the level design is not very good. Enemies and platforms are just thrown into random spots, the challenges never elevate into anything exciting, and a lot of the screens just end up blending together. The overworld map is a bit more thought out, as it's actually kinda non-linear and requires a lot of Surge Action-esque exploration and experimentation, but even this leads to a lot of backtracking through the already repetitive platforming areas. These problems may sound pretty major, because well, they are, but they are at the very least mitigated by some pretty even pacing. Progression never feels too slow, as new areas and abilities are found fairly often throughout the journey, and the combat, while simple, never gets too old with how many new ideas are continually introduced throughout this 5-hour-long experience. Oh yeah, the game is super short too. You'll soon notice that this is a pretty common theme on this list, but as far as short campaigns go, I'd say this one is worth checking out. There's obviously some pretty major drawbacks, but it's one of those experiences that's greater than the sum of its parts. It's cool that WayForward did something so ambitious with the property, rather than churning out a bare-bones platformer or a generic minigame collection. As a baseline, I think that's what makes a good licensed game a good licensed game. While the genre is always going to have some inherent budget, schedule, and level design limitations, some developers are able to overcome that and make experiences that are both fun and memorable. It's not perfect, but for gamers who are already fans of Adventure Time, it's honestly worth checking out. So with that quality example aside, let's look at another one that's definitely not bad, but isn't as good either. Just 1 year later, in the fall of 2013, Cartoon Network and WayForward collaborated on another 3DS game based on another popular series, this time producing Regular Show, Mordecai, and Rigby in 8-Bit Land. First off, can I just say that Regular Show is like the best thing? Don't at me.
Whoa! Turtles are awesome!
Okay, that aside, Mordecai and Rigby in 8-Bit Land is an NES-inspired platformer and shoot-'em-up and top-down shooter. While the foundation is based on the usual old-school platforming that one would expect, players are eventually given the ability to instantly swap into other gameplay styles when within certain areas. Sometimes you'll be jumping over enemies, sometimes you'll be shooting them from afar, and sometimes you'll be narrowly avoiding them in a 3D space. At times, you'll even need to mismatch these in quick succession, swapping between Mordecai's agile moveset, Rigby's nimbler stature, the spaceship's quick speed, and the top-down shooter's versatile power. Regular Show was a series that reveled in 80s nostalgia and offbeat quirkiness, so mashing together several retro styles is a practically perfect fit for an adaptation, and for the most part, it works really well. Emphasis on "for the most part," because expectedly, there are some pretty major issues that hold the experience back. I'm just going to say it, the actual feel of the game is just kinda bad. Like I said, the ideas are good, and I would even argue that the level design itself stands out more than WayForward's prior CN-based outing. But all of that kinda loses its impact with how floaty and off the physics feel. Imagine playing Kirby Star Allies, but copy abilities are kinda rare, and the only other way to defend yourself is to jump on enemies, despite being really floaty, and if you miss, you die in only one hit. It's bad. This mediocrity doesn't outright ruin the whole thing, as the constant swapping between styles does mitigate things through pure novelty alone, but whenever you're asked to platform or fly around with any precision, it immediately becomes a difficult and sometimes unfair feeling challenge. I don't mind a good challenge, especially in a retro throwback, but dying because of the controls is one of the worst sins that any game can offer. It's a shame because just a little more polish could have made this a truly standout experience. The style swapping is really distinct, and the level design is surprisingly good at forcing players to use their whole arsenal. It's just, if the jumps feel bad in a platformer, you can only go so far. Of course, this is still a regular show game, so does it at least succeed in capturing what we like about the series? Well, let's go over the plot first. Mordecai and Rigby are supposed to be doing some work, but they don't wanna, and then they get sucked into a video game. That's it. Pretty typical regular show fare, honestly. Although, unlike Adventure Time's previous outing, this one is much lighter on the jokes and story elements. The only cutscenes are at the beginning and end, both of which are just standalone stills from the series, and neither of which have any actual voice acting. A few of the enemies and power-ups come from the series, but otherwise there aren't that many things connecting this to the show, which feels like another missed opportunity to me. Benson, Skips, Muscleman, and the rest are all such memorable characters, so give them something to do, like make them bosses or shopkeepers or anything. Overall, Mordecai and Rigby in 8-Bit Land definitely doesn't come together as well as Higwaisog, so it's not something I can recommend wholeheartedly, but it's definitely not a bad game. Even with the lack of polish and the 3-hour runtime, I can at least still appreciate the good ideas that it has, marking this title firmly in the just okay category of license games. It may not be a passion project from fans of the show or anything, but it at the very least feels like a solid attempt at a subversive platformer, and sometimes that's all you need. Anyway, now that we've covered 2 WayForward produced Cartoon Network adventures, I think it's time we branch out into something completely different, in what may be this list's real low point. This one hurts. The Legend of Korra: A New Era Begins is a 3DS exclusive strategy RPG that released in the fall of 2014. Unlike the eponymous Nickelodeon series, this title didn't really get much discussion, likely because it was overshadowed by the much more popular console tie-in from Platinum Games that released on the same day. This one, on the other hand, was developed by Webfoot Technologies, who, as far as I can tell, doesn't seem to have that great of a track record, although both of them were published by Activision, so pick your poison. The game takes place after the show's second season, adapting a similar original story to its console counterpart. Except instead of being an action game, it's Fire Emblem. I'm not even being facetious, it's literally a dumbed down version of Fire Emblem, right down to the almost identical UI. It's not a terrible idea though. In fact, the genre is honestly a perfect fit for the world of Avatar. Between all 4 styles of bending, the different weapons and fighting styles of the core cast, and the rich, interesting universe, there's so much one could do by mashing together The Legend of Korra and, say, XCOM. And the reason this game hurts is because it does not live up to that potential at all. Basically, imagine Fire Emblem, but without any of the aspects that people like about that series. The map design is boring and bloated, there's not much unit customization or relationship building to add any variety or goals to work toward. The only differing units I came across were the 4 bending types plus non-benders, and most damningly, enemies barely even put up a fight, giving little incentive to strategize in a strategy game, which is kinda a problem. The whole experience feels like it was built on an extremely small budget, especially when you take into account the story, or the lack thereof. There is zero personality to this writing. Just look at how passively Korra is speaking, like where is her usual spunk? Just look at Bolin awkwardly recapping the plot in the least subtle way. play. Just look at these cutscenes. As you can see, it looks dreadful. Even the music is mostly these generic 45-second loops, which you don't really want in a game where you're sitting around and slowly moving units. I'll be honest, I only played this one for about 90 minutes before putting it down. I would have tried to get through the full campaign to get a better judgment of the quality, but apparently it's 10 hours long and I have taxes to pay and grass to touch. A New Era Begins is the quintessential example of a bad license game. It takes a great IP and a great gameplay style, but doesn't do anything that impressive or memorable with either. Maybe they could have done better with more resources, or maybe the dev team just couldn't handle this type of game. Either way, it's definitely a dud. Let's just hope that one of the future Avatar Studios projects is some sort of game within that universe, because the potential there is bonkers. Now, with 2 of the 3 iconic childhood channels covered, it's time to dive into the Disney side of things. Yes, we're finally covering the reason that you clicked into this clickbaity clickbait, a 3DS game based on one of Disney's most beloved IPs. Huh. Okay, I know this one is kind of out of place, but this game is just so baffling that I couldn't not cover it. Finding Nemo: Escape to the Big Blue Special Edition is a 3DS re-release of a 2006 tie-in game for the Nintendo DS, and it came out in September 2012, 9 years after the original Finding Nemo, but 4 years before the sequel. Again, huh? It was only a matter of time until we stumbled upon one of the most common forms of shovelware, the minigame collection. When you don't have the time or resources to produce something cohesive, just throw together some stock minigames and cheap assets, then throw it on store shelves and reap the rewards. Not my thing, but I respect the hustle, I guess. In terms of this one's specific quality, it's honestly fine. Even though Marlon, Dory, and Bruce are on the cover, they only appear in a few cutscenes and minigames, because the main focus is instead on Nemo and the Tank Gang. Each of these characters have 4 respective activities, with 3 being unique and 1 always being a rollout style escape to the ocean. That specific minigame is definitely the most fleshed out part of the experience, as it features several different levels with varying designs and mechanics. The faster you roll around, the harder it is to stop, which makes for a decently fun control style even if it's somewhat limited by how easy each area is. That's not really a bad thing considering this is a game made for young children, but the player literally has 5 hearts in a mode without many hazards, so it's probably harder to die than it is to survive. At least we now know that Bubbles from Finding Nemo can take 4 hits from a semi and still swim on. I'll be sure to add that to his Disney Wiki page. The rest of the minigames skew more to the generic side, with your typical variations of memory matching, tapping to the rhythm, and hide and seek. Once again, none of these really stand out, but none of them are explicitly bad either. A few of them are even pretty novel, like this one where you have to crank the shrimp down a pit to find certain fish while avoiding others, or this other one where you clear out some landmines and boulders for the shrimp to pass through. Also, why is the shrimp's model so crisp? Why are all of these models so crisp? Despite being an updated DS game, it looks really nice. Good for it, I guess. I could probably be harsher to this game if I wanted to, but it's such a benign experience that I can't muster up any other feelings besides indifference. It's not bad, it's not good, it's competent. I'm not the angry video game nerd, I don't know what you expect. Lastly, I should note that there were a few changes in this re-release, the most marketed of which being the inclusion of brief clips from the movie. It's always kind of funny to me when that's used as a selling point. Wow, I can't wait to watch 240p clips of a movie that I own on DVD. Although these cutscenes could at least be viewed in 3D, which I guess is kinda neat. Wait, this game was made for 3DS to tie into the 3D re-release that they did in theaters in 2012. That's so...
This broke me. That broke me. I'm done.
I don't even have a grand summation for this one. I just can't think of a more serendipitous existence than a game being re-released in 3D to promote a movie being re-released in 3D. Remember when they did that? The first Star Wars movie I saw in theaters was The Phantom Menace in 3D. I need to move on. This game is making me question every choice I've ever made. Gravity Falls: Legend of the Gnome Gemulets is a 2015 tie-in to Disney's massively popular animated series. Like the first game we covered, this one is also relatively well known, partially because it was helmed by Ubisoft Osaka, the developers of the second South Park game. While that would usually be a turnoff for obvious reasons, the game sticks out nonetheless because of its usage of the UbiArt engine, the same one that was used for Rayman Legends and Child of Light. Meaning, of course, the game looks positively gorgeous. I think it might even be one of the best looking 3DS games in general. It almost perfectly captures the show's art style in a 3D space, with lush, hand-drawn environments that really make the town of Gravity Falls come to life. The composer, Nicholas Minardi, accompanies this aesthetic with a score that almost perfectly matches the vibe of Brad Breek's wonderful compositions from the series proper. Even if the areas that you actually explore are not particularly interesting, they at least feel incredibly homey. Speaking of, the four main areas are the woods, the lake, the caves, and the mines. Yes, the caves and the mines are different. Yes, that is incredibly boring. This doesn't sound like much, because it isn't, but each level is at least fairly lengthy and non-linear. Your primary goal is to find the gnome Gemulet at the end of each level, but you can't access them until you have found 4 hidden artifacts for Grunkle Stan to display in the Mystery Shack. This does add a nice explorative bent to the gameplay, forcing players to go off the beaten path and use the twins' many abilities. Dipper has the journal and the shrinking flashlight, Mabel has a grappling hook and can whip with her sweater, and you can swap between the two of them at any time. Although, as you can see, I only ever played as Mabel because she's just the best. That said, the exploration doesn't feel particularly organic. If you just beeline to the finish, Stan will block you from progression, yeah, but each level would only take a few minutes. The artifacts sorta feel like your typical hidden side content in a platformer, now made to be required for completion, especially supported by the fact that you don't even find any equipable items through exploration like a search action. You are literally given them by Seuss between levels, and half of the items you do get are slight upgrades of the previous ones. It reeks of the developers not having the time to make anything more than 4 levels. Or 8 levels. Ugh, we'll get to that in a moment. The plot centers around Dipper and Mabel trying to find the titular gnome Gemulets to stop a dark prophecy that was foretold by Jeff the Gnome, which turns out to secretly be an attempt to take over Gravity Falls from Dark Jeff the Gnome. Okay, that is kinda funny, but also, why Jeff? I get licensed games usually need to base their content off of early stuff in a series, but this came out right during the end of Season 2, so a focus on the lawn gnomes from the first episode just feels antiquated and tacky. I have no serious personal investment in this story, so none of the jokes land, so none of the characters feel relevant, so I just don't care. It does not help that upon finding the Gemulets and inadvertently unleashing Dark Jeff, you have to go through these same levels again with a new dark aesthetic. It's no wonder that series creator Alex Hirsch actively threw shade at the game in one of the audio commentaries.
I've always wished there was a Gravity Falls like Nintendo DS game or something.
There is a 3DS game.
That's true. I forgot about
Played
that.
it all the way through a couple times.
I have
guys.
not played it.
And also on Twitter. Thank you, Ella from the Mystery Shack Look Back podcast, for informing me about this.
Hey, at Disney XD, take notice! Get smaller, hungrier independent studios to work on your IP to produce inspired results. Don't waste money with big studios and lots of internal overhead. You'll burn your budget on some meetings about meetings and get someone's C-team.
Called out. Damn. Seriously though, he says it better than I can. No matter how good or bad the rest of the game might be, it's always going to be hampered by the fact that the 2D platformer style doesn't really fit the Gravity Falls vibe at all. This is a series about mysteries, monsters, puzzles, horror, and action. Something that would be perfectly suited for a top-down adventure like Zelda or a silly point-and-click like Sam & Max. Gnome Gemulets just springing for a fairly standard variation of an already common genre makes the whole experience feel somewhat generic, which, you can probably see where this is going, is another common licensed game vice. Platformers are one of the most ubiquitous genres in all of gaming, so from a publisher's point of view, they are by far the safest and most profitable option for a tie-in. Why make something ambitious and fitting to the source material when you could just make something cheap, fast, and instantly accessible? It's definitely a shame, but from a purely business perspective, I do understand. From a purely artistic perspective, though, I think that intersection of capturing what people like about a series and capturing what folks enjoy about video games as a whole is much more important to creating a memorable licensed tie-in. Video games are obviously a very different medium from film or television, so if you're going to repackage Finding Nemo into a 3DS title, don't just feed me Finding Nemo, feed me a version of that world that can only be achieved through interactivity. If you don't do that, I'm just going to watch Finding Nemo. When publishers understand this, we get cohesive standalone experiences like Adventure Time HIKWYSOG, and when publishers ignore this, we get mild disappointments like Gravity Falls Legend of the Gnome Jamulets. And everything that falls between just kinda gets lost to time in a sea of mediocrity. This conclusion may sound kind of obvious, but I do think it's important to recognize this often ignored factor that these titles are usually up against. Making a video game is hard. Making a good video game is even harder. And making a good video game that stays true to its source material while still delivering a fresh and well-designed experience that will be palpable to the masses, well, let's say that I don't envy the devs who have to deal with that. Even with all of this said, licensed games are always going to be in a weird spot because the reason that they exist is usually pretty cynical. There are exceptions, of course, especially in recent years, but as a whole, these products were greenlit to trick parents into buying a cheap, recognizable toy for their kids. So in some respects, I do understand the hesitation to even give these games a chance. The line between actual artistic merit and cynical real-world practices is certainly a difficult one to straddle. Heck, that's basically what all of my video essays this year have been about. Shameless plug, don't forget to subscribe! However, after playing these 5 different licensed games, each with a different genre and publisher and level of quality, my tune has changed at least somewhat. While these games can and should be criticized when due, I also don't think they should be vilified from the outset either. Even the most cynically conceived works of art are still works of art that can be good or bad like any other medium. In this small, recent selection, I found plenty of genuine attempts to create something great, some of which succeeded, some of which failed, and some of which fell somewhere in between, all sandwiched in a medium that most might overlook. So yeah, I may laugh at how random it is that a Hotel Transylvania game is on the eShop in the holy year 2021, but someone out there programmed that game and probably thinks it's the coolest thing ever that something they made hit store shelves. And I can 100% respect that. It may not always be for me, but man, good for that person at least. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm going to wait for an Infinity Train big budget RPG and an Owl House dating sim where I can marry Ida. Thanks for watching.
Come along with me. Subscribe for more cool stuff to see. Maybe we'll look at some more games based off shows on TV. Come along, yes you. Like and comment your thoughts too.